Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'm going to be reviewing Ecosocialism by Michael Lowey. This book is published by Haymarket, and this video is part of the Indie Press project hosted by Stephanie over at Time to Read. Even in periods of intense political strife, I find the general political imagination to often be a little limited and uninspiring. While taming capitalism is immediately necessary, I'm really interested in exploring what utopian ideas might lie beyond the taming and the political band-aids. Even if I'm not won over by every single idea I come across, every new idea offers novel ways to organize ourselves based on our values that bring out the best in humanity. So in considering not just the gross inequality, but the impossibility of infinite growth models and the necessity of incorporating ecology in any realistic ideologies we plan to pursue, Michael Lowey's Ecosocialism was bound to intrigue me. Ecosocialism is a series of essays that talks about socialism, or a sort of socialism that takes into consideration the ecological impact of human action. It mentions how Marxism in its original form did comment a little bit on ecology but didn't go far enough and focuses too much on productivism and kind of misses the point of the fact that we can't just switch to a system that is equally extractive and equally focused on this producing type of mentality when we live on a planet of finite resources. What I like in particular about it is that it's not just from a Western and particularly Eurocentric perspective. Being from Brazil, I think, Michael Lowey talks a lot about indigenous people, particularly in South America, and the fights that they've waged against capitalist forces that are destroying their environment and essentially destroying global environments. The text is not intended to convince anyone who doesn't already believe there are problems. I would say it's very much preaching to the choir, and it is very dramatic in places. Like, I can just imagine the author getting up on his soapbox in the middle of Hyde Park or something and emphatically making his speech about the need for the downfall of capitalism. And while I agreed with a lot of what he was saying, it just felt a little bit over the top for me, stylistically. That said, I didn't feel like every essay was like that. There are some essays that I felt were a little bit repetitive, but I find that to be the case with a lot of essay collections, particularly ones that are essentially a collection of speeches or anything on essentially the same topic. I personally would have liked to see more essays about what's going on in South America and about what indigenous leaders are doing. That's something that I don't know a lot about. On the ideological front, I wouldn't say that this book necessarily taught me a whole lot of new things, though I did highlight a lot the fact that capitalism does all these destructive things, and the fact that it's very extractive, and the fact that it is terrible for social justice, etc., etc. Those are things that I feel like are pretty obvious, but what is less obvious is how people are fighting back in niche areas, or how indigenous people are finding ways to fight back, or even what we can do about it. I would say overall the book is very vague in terms of providing solutions and in terms of specific things that anyone can do. There's really nothing as far as what we as individuals can do, and as far as what society would have to put in place. There is nothing there in that respect. That said, I feel like any books on ideology are probably better off with this method, because I think a blueprint method is never going to be applicable to all places. So in a way, I feel like it's probably better to just talk about values and allow different areas to apply whatever they feel is best to enforce those values in their area, rather than saying everyone needs to set up workers' collectives, for example. That might not be appropriate for every area. So instead saying that we need to value people over profit, for example, then that allows people to more flexibly respond to problems. And like I said, this book is very much preaching to the converted, so it's only going to be a text that I can recommend to people who are already interested in ecosocialism, already interested in environmental issues, already interested in socialism, already sort of well-versed in quite a lot of the language of those topics, because I would also say that it's not exactly an intro text. I think it's a short text, and I was thinking that I would get through it quite quickly, but because of the type of language used, it's not as if it's super difficult. But It does take a little bit more time and slow you down when you're reading. I personally don't really like that. I feel like it's important for all of these kinds of texts, especially when you're talking about changing whole cultures and attitudes and systems. I think it's really important for all of that language to be super accessible. And I feel like there were a lot of times when he was using language that is just a little bit exclusionary. And I don't think that authors intend for their works to be exclusionary in that way. I feel like it comes from being too immersed in their own bubbles, and then they don't realize how to connect with the everyday person whose language is not quite as heavily laden with academic terms. So I guess this is just one where you kind of know if you want to read it or not before even approaching it. It seemed appropriate to get outside to do this review about ecosocialism, and I quite like just getting outside anyway. Again, I think it's probably useful for me to talk about books that I've either already read from Haymarket or ones that I'm excited to pick up at some point. A few years ago, I read Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Y. Davis. This is a collection of essays and interviews with Angela Y. Davis, who is an activist who fights not just for prison reform, but prison abolition. And she also talks about the situation with Palestine, how it's connected to a lot of anti-racism struggles that are going on in the US, like Black Lives Matter, for example. This is definitely a book that I would recommend to anyone who's interested in anything to do with social justice at all. The book that I was actually planning on picking up for the Indie Press Project's Haymarket Month was How We Get Free, Black Feminism and the Combahee River Collective. This is a collection of essays by several black feminist activists, and I think it not only covers what's going on with black feminist movements now, but also how they came to be. Too Many People by Ian, Angus and Simon Butler is the next book on my list to get to from Haymarket. This looks at the overpopulation myth, the idea that there are too many brown people being born in the world, and that's the root of all of our climate change issues. This is not only incorrect and therefore distracting for planning out climate change solutions, but it's also rooted in an insidious sort of racism. If the idea that overpopulation isn't our main problem with climate change sounds suspicious to you, I'm going to just leave a link to the video that George Monbiot did with Double Down News talking about this very subject. The last book that I'm going to mention is The Ballot, The Streets, or Both by August Nimtz. This essentially looks at the conflict between eliciting change through the system versus outside of the system. I feel like these are two sides of the same coin, and I think we do need both, but I'd like to know more about the arguments on either side, and I'd like to know what August Nimtz thinks about bringing the two together. I'm going to leave it at those 5 recommendations for now, but I think Haymarket would be a fantastic publisher to check out with Nonfiction November coming up. If you've read anything great from Haymarket that you'd like to recommend to me, or if there are any books that you've seen here or from their catalogue that you're really excited about, let me know in the comments below. So that's all for now. Let me know what you think about this kind of review. I think it's quite nice to get out and do this. A little bit weird, but I'm pretty much alone because I'm out here in the morning, but it was... well, like I say, it's nice for me. Let me know if it's nice for you too, and maybe I will do this more often, or maybe I won't. I don't know. We'll just have to see. But that's all for now, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.